What's up, Mac Nostalgia? Dave here in our podcast. What's going on in pop culture right now? A lot of things I'm really hyped on this week. A duo of new Chinese Lunar New Year movies released here in the States, day and date with China. That's new. We haven't had that before. Those films are Scare Out and Pegasus 3 specifically. Also on the film front, the Japanese historical drama film Kokuho, The Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Season 1 on HBO. I've released a new album. Full pack show. Make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod. Linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Let me know what's good. Leave a comment. Let's get into it. What's up, Mac Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of IVE's second album, Revive Plus. Revive? Either way, their second full-length album, the Starship Entertainment K-pop group, is pretty well established at this point, as certainly a strong commercial force, especially over in Asia, has not really become too big here in the States, at least not yet. This new project, though, packed with 12 songs, 6 of which are solo tracks from each of the IVE members. It's the first time they've really dabbled in any kind of official solo material. IVE's second album, Revive Plus, continues the sonic evolution that IVE has subtly been going through over the past few years. As a group that made their name with these big maximalist pop choruses, it's been interesting to see them shift the sound to include a lot more hip-hop elements and a lot more of an electronic focus with their music. There's definitely a lot more attitude and bite on this album than a lot of the past IVE work. That said, I do find a lot of the hip-hop on Revive Plus to be a bit contrived, a bit copy-paste, which is an unfortunate problem with a lot of K-pop music. I'm also a bit disappointed in the choruses on this album just because they're a lot subtler and simpler. It's just a bit of a melodic change from what we're used to with their music. Of the 6 group tracks, I think the lead single, Bang Bang, is so. To me, Hot Coffee is the clear standout there. And then of the solo tracks, I think clearly the best song is Force from Yujin. Really distinct, powerful vocals that pop a lot in the context of this album. And yeah, at this point, I'm just curious to see where IVE goes because they're starting to surprise us with these changes to their sound. The first track, Black Hole, noticeable guitar line here, which has not been too common with a lot of IVE production. The bass drum, I think, really stands out here. The hook, though, with this song, it's just okay. You know, I think it's fine. Almost this song kind of functions as like a loud intro, like an intro for the album. And I think there's something just a bit missing in terms of like a greater substance with the song to ascribe it anything else beyond being a type of intro. So it was fine to me. Bang Bang has this very Old West style guitar line, definitely recognizable for sure. I think the hip hop here is like really in your face. I think some of the delivery, frankly, on the song, the kind of more like hip, like rap talk style delivery, very reminiscent of Espa Supernova to me. I think the bang, though, the repetitiveness of that, you know, leading up to the beat drop, just really grating right away. And then you have this chorus that's pretty okay just because it's subtle. And I think the tempo's fun and nice. And I think verse 2 in particular has pretty good rap flow, which is not something I've often said about IVE. But yeah, the song's just fine to me overall. Hush, I think, is a lot stronger. I love the vocal melody. I think it's really nice, really grabs you right away. And this is over a bouncy kick drum that I think is quite catchy. You know, I think the refrain in the chorus here, it kind of jumps out to you just because these vocals are a lot more energetic. And I think this is a chorus that's a lot better than Bang Bang's hip hop again. In verse 2, it's kind of like become the trend on this album that they're just going to drop in a lot of these rap verses. Stuck in Your Head is fine, kind of this quick drum tempo. I think the chorus stands out just because the group of vocal layering is actually pretty nice. There's not a ton of like big bombastic like full group vocals on this album. Fireworks, I love the thumpingness of those drums. The song builds up and it slows down. And I think the initial chorus vocals come across as quite washed out. Frankly, this is, I think, a pretty weird song just in terms of its structure. And the verse 2 rap, this is definitely the most forced in of all the hip hop verses on this album. Definitely the most copy paste to me. The guitar does pick up in the second half, which is a bit interesting. But yeah, song's kind of a mess. As I mentioned, Hot Coffee, my favorite of these 6 group tracks. I love how the vocal notes really hit the synth hits, like they really match. Sounds really nice. And the chorus, I think, is pretty good. And I think it's probably my favorite beat on the whole album overall. And just simply some of the best vocal elements from the whole group. And this leads us to the second half, which is all the solo tracks, starting with the first one, 8 from Wonyoung. And man, this is not what I expected. The Wonyoung solo song on the IVE album is a rap track, up-tempo verses, chorus. This song is super weird to me because it's Wonyoung like flexing hard like she's Lisa from Blackpink. I mean, her saying foreign's on my way, I can't do it. It just comes across as pretty inauthentic and contrived to me. Really weird song to hear her over trap drums. Strange. Yeah, I don't think it works. I think it comes across as pretty cringy. I think the rest of the other solos, though, work to varying degrees a lot better than that one. Odd from Gale, I think the guitar ballad, like start to the song, definitely threw me off because it actually gets this quite fun tempo on the chorus, and I like her delivery overall. Super Icy from Licio, kind of like a techno vocal delivery, like the type of vocals you'd associate with like a techno song, like an electronic, like Daft Punk vocal or something. I think the attitude is pretty present on the verses as well and matches that beat pretty interestingly. The line, "I'm your favorite snow bunny," definitely made me raise an eyebrow, I must admit. Unreal from Liz, I think this one's interesting because it's very throwback, very like power pop, almost like an 80s vocal melody. Not really, 80s is not really something I've done before. Something more poppy like this, yes, but it was noticeable that this was definitely like a throwback to the pop trend of a few years ago, early pandemic era. Pretty catchy, I have to say. In Your Heart from Ray, I think this one's interesting because it's super rapid fire. Just this glitchy beat, glitchy tempo, and the vocals with the auto-tune actually kind of match that well. Very electronic vibe to it. Interesting concept. I think thought it was kind of cool. And then, as I mentioned before, Force, the Yoonjin solo to close us out, definitely the best. I mean, the vocals are just the strongest of any of the vocals on the album. I love her range within her delivery too, the way she's able to like go down like half an octave at certain moments. It sounds tremendous. The verses are really bouncy over this beat with that bass drum. And the vocals, I think, are really hit on the chorus. After hearing this, I would welcome a Yoonjin solo album. You know, I know she's one of the more famous and popular members of IVE, but to really hear a song like this, a concept like this, I'm definitely intrigued by what else she could do in a solo capacity. My biggest gripe with the song is the breakdown in the second half or the last third is very noticeable. It's actually called out. It's clearly a dance break for like live performance. Really doesn't add all that much. I could have really done without it. But overall, I like the song. And yeah, IVE, Revive. Let me know what you thought of this. Where are you at with IVE as a group these days and what they sound like today versus what they sounded like 3-4 years ago? Let me know. And for more music reviews, more K-pop reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Baby Keem's second album, Casino, his first album since the debut, The Melodic Blue, came out way back in 2021. And of course, Baby Keem, had that early rise with hits like Orange Soda, but largely got a lot of fame due to his association with Kendrick Lamar, his cousin. Keem, of course, is the most notable signee to Kendrick Lamar's PG Lang imprint. Won a Grammy with Kendrick for his song Family Ties, which has become, frankly, a massive track that has done incredible streaming numbers, is a really common song to hear live from DJs and whatnot. And, when reflecting on Baby Keem, I had been anticipating an album from him for some time, and of course that was largely given away once he was announced in the Coachella lineup and present at other music festivals this year. And, it's exciting that he's back after a longer than expected wait, frankly. And, those other songs, I still have a lot of time for Lost Souls with Brent Faiyaz, for example. I think Keem's energy level and his vocal tics very reminiscent of Kendrick Lamar, but have also engendered a lot of genuine fans of his, even if overall maybe Keem still felt like a work in progress in certain areas with that last album and those first mixtapes. However, I'm really excited because Baby Keem's second album, Casino, is clearly his best work to date. This album exceeded all of my expectations and is really impressive front to back. Keem has improved tremendously as a lyricist. The variety in song structure, delivery from Keem. Keem, of course, has been very experienced as a producer, as a crafter of music. And that's taken to the next level because he's able to match that now with an even wider palette of vocal delivery. If there's one thing people used to knock Keem for, it was his lyrics, but Keem's ability as a storyteller, as a songwriter, has taken a huge step forward with Casino. There's an inherent charisma to the way he raps and the style he has that I think really resonates. A song like Birds and the Bees, a song like Sex Appeal, he's got bangers, and there's a lot of bangers on this album. I really am super pleased with how Casino turned out, and I'm really excited for the future of Keem, because this, I think, reassured a lot of people that were really interested in his pretty innate talent, because I feel like now he's really kind of tapped into that. And, he spoke about why this album took so long to come out. He wasn't trying to be reclusive. He actually was going through some personal things, particularly regarding his family life and his mother. And he gets into that quite frankly, quite openly on this album here, especially the final song, No Blame, where he's, directly can be talking to his mother. Just because you're the cousin of Kendrick Lamar, the most celebrated rapper we have at the moment, doesn't mean your life is without challenges. Right off the bat, you have No Security with this very noticeable piano underneath, and the flow from Keem, almost like a nursery rhyme-esque style, the way that pitter patter works. Pretty reflective of the come up, pretty traditional intro track. Past struggles coming up a lot here. He follows that song, though, with the title track Casino, this great bass drop. I love the switch up in Keem's flow. The second half of this song, I think, is really hard. The childlike vocals really are a nice touch as well. Almost these like haunted Teletubbies, the way they sound. Pretty good. And then the album just completely leaves the planet for me, because track 3, Birds and the Bees, is top 3, top 4, top 2 Keem song ever. Like, I think this song is absolutely incredible. I love this hook. I think this is a great example of what makes Keem special. The way he snaps back with these pitched up vocals and then gets you to this hook. Very Keem style of charisma, with this Monday, Tuesday, kind of framing of the chorus, but the way he hits you with that twang, Thursday you gonna meet baby Keem, the way he says that is so catchy to me. And I think this is just a really tremendous chorus. I think it's really catchy. I love the vocal melody here. I've had a lot of time for this song over the past few days. I think it's really catchy, really well done, and such a tremendous chorus. But the verses are really there too. I think it's a really fun, kind of sex jam song. Then you have Good Flirts, which features Kendrick Lamar, his only feature on the album. Not nearly as a showstoppery the way Family Ties went. But I think it's pretty fun, playful R&B joint, more of a softer voice from Keem for sure. Kenny getting into his sex talk, which can be amusing, as we've learned over the years. Kind of a fun vocal back and forth. I like the track. I'm Not a Lyricist gets into, I think, more of a serious tone, as the song title might suggest, with these keys and this drum tempo. Definitely a statement of intent type song, as Keem like, hey, I can write too. Don't forget. Drake, in fact, brought up Keem writing on Family Matters 2 years ago in the Kendrick Drake diss, funny enough, saying that Kendrick didn't have any hot songs that Keem didn't write. Connecting that back to Keem himself, I think Keem's like, hey, let me make sure people don't forget I can write my own songs as well. Pretty personal, though. I think the chorus, almost like a bit folky at times, and there's just one moment where Keem sounds verbatim exactly like Andre 3000, which is pretty cool. Then we have one of, if not my favorite song on the album, between Birds and the Bees and Sex Appeal. I love both of them. The song's featuring Too Short in a great, guest spot here. I love the looping of this beat, especially the way it starts. The melody on this song is gas. I think this is a complete bop. Beat goes absolutely crazy. And I love the vocal performance from Keem. He can get really melodic. He can get super hard. He has an impressive range at this point, and he does a lot of that over the course of this album, and he'll actually do quite a bit of variety over the course of specific songs on this album as well. But I think Sex Appeal is just so catchy. This is just such a bop, and Too Short just coming in to do his pimpin' ass charisma. It fits the song like a glove. Highway 95 Part 2, more of that like textbook nasally delivery from Keem over these snares. I think the repetitive chorus here kind of wears on me, by the second time through, I think this song kind of runs out of steam. Circus Freestyle, pretty good. I think they like the way it starts, and then there's a series of switch ups here as the beat changes and Keem's flow changes. These big horns at one moment. Keem giving you a deeper voice at times. I think the background gets pretty haunting towards the end. You get some bass drum picking up that third time through. Pretty solid for a freestyle type track. And then Dramatic Girl is a big change from there. Upbeat again, a bit more nasally again. This guitar lick kind of comes out of nowhere with these quicker drums. Pretty solid. And then, No Blame. Kick drum, kind of these slow keys. And then just talking the last specific bars about his mother and having a really rough childhood. Frankly, it's a song that's a bit of a tough listen in terms of what Keem is actually talking about, but pretty effective as a closer. So yeah, I think for me, Birds and the Bees and Sex Appeal are the ones that are really going to stick around for me, but I like a lot of the other tracks too, like the title track. Overall, though, it's an album that I really enjoyed front to back, and I think it's in all likelihood going to be one of the best rap albums of 2026, I would have to imagine. It's certainly one that I expect to have a lot of time for moving forward. Let me know, though, what you think of Baby Keem's second album, Casino. How are you feeling about his return after a longer than expected wait? Where are you at with it? And for more rap reviews, more music reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Episode 1, 6 episodes out in full on HBO. This, of course, is the second Game of Thrones spin-off series following House of the Dragon, which will be returning for Season 3 later this year. And this spin-off series is particularly notable for how it is different from its predecessors. I adored A Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1. This series is such a great off-speed pitch for Game of Thrones and a perfect complement to House of the Dragon. By being a smaller scope, character-focused series largely set in one location, we're able to spend time in Westeros in a way that's reminiscent of the early days of Thrones. There's not a ton of plot to service, no great CGI battle that needs to be created. We're out here chilling with Dunk and Egg. Ira Parker did a great job adapting this novella, which was only 120 some odd pages. The decision to make this a 6-episode half-hour series was such a great idea. They also really nailed the casting. I mean, Peter Claffey as Dunk, young Dexter Sol Ansel as Egg, tremendous, but then all the supporting characters. I mean, Daniel Ings stealing the show as Lionel Baratheon, Finn Bennett as Aerion Targaryen, Bertie Cavell and Sam Spruill as Baelor and Maekar. The show is a great success, and I'm really excited to see the next 2 novels adapted, and I also think there is potential room to go beyond the book once again, given how successful this realization of this period of Game of Thrones history was. Overall, it's a really faithful adaptation of the novel, which I just recently read for the first time after having the Night of the Seven Kingdoms compilation book on my shelf for probably 10 years at this point. I finally read The Hedge Knight Book 1, and I thought they did a really fantastic job of just kind of bringing us into here. I mean, the essential conceit of the Ashford tourney and having a tourney be the one location to set our plot works out really well, and also why I'm really excited about the Game of Thrones stage play adaptation that's finally beginning over in England later this year. That, of course, is adapting the tourney at Harrenhal, which, of course, is very famous in Game of Thrones lore. I think that's a great idea. But to use a tourney as the setting for this series was a great way just to have a lot of characters all in one place and just get to know these people. And there's still plenty of subversion to the plot. I think as people are watching this show and as it begins and you're getting to know Dunk, you think this is going to be maybe not a rags to riches story, but at least some kind of like sports movie trope type thing where he's going to somehow win the tourney or exceed expectations despite not having much in the way of formal training against all these, landed knights of the realm. But the story is able to twist the plot into something that's much more exciting with this trial of the Seven, of course, when Dunk is basically wronged by Aerion and has to defend himself before his life is completely ruined. They do a great job of not overextending the twist about who Egg actually is in terms of his identity and his family and whatnot. I think they drop that twist in at just the right time, and they seed it pretty heavily. If you're looking out for it, I mean, it's certainly nodded to, but I like the way they played that. And yeah, I thought this was just a really satisfying show. And I think Ira Parker, the showrunner, deserves a lot of credit for what changes they did make, namely like all these flashback scenes with Sir Arlen of Pennytree. A lot of that was, kind of in Dunk's head and spoken of and thoughts he had, but we actually go back and see a good amount of these. And of course, there's the really mammoth flashback in episode 5, which is completely absent from the book, where we kind of learn in great detail how Dunk escaped Flea Bottom and came into the service of Sir Arlen, basically out of pure happenstance. This show does a great job of reminding us about a key tenet of early Thrones, whether you think of Arya and the Hound, or Brienne and Podrick, or Tyrion and various people he accompanies, right? It's a common theme of the bastards and broken things, trope within Thrones, and having Dunk, this mammoth man of humble beginnings, paired with Egg, this young princeling of great privilege but no experience. It's really, really good stuff. And again, I think it's peppered in so well because even though, again, the show moves at a brisk pace, we don't get to know too many supporting characters too well. All their scenes, I think, are really impactful. I mean, Daniel Ings runs away with every scene he's in as Lionel Baratheon. Lionel Baratheon definitely a much bigger face on the show than he necessarily is on the page, but I think right away when we spend that time in his tent and we see him as this very merry lord who likes to party and drink and whatnot, the tug of war scene that he partakes in and exits and returns to the rope at inopportune times for the rest of the tuggers. That was cool. The opening scene of the final episode 6, where he's peering down at a completely bludgeoned and bruised Dunk with his maester in tow. And of course, you approach this show in the macro. This was a really exciting show for HBO to get right because this is a much cheaper, more affordable way to return to the world of Westeros. This show cost a fraction of what a House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones episode costs, right? And that makes sense, largely character focused, one setting, limited in terms of CGI budget, all those things, right? Makes a lot of sense. But I think also it really works for the viewer and the fan because to see the vastness of the sandbox of Thrones really for the first time, I think, to people that weren't really in the weeds as book readers, right? Seeing the scope of House of the Dragon, right? The Targaryen Civil War, the dance, something so epic and famous in Thrones lore. Contrast that with a character show with the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is about effectively two characters, dicking around. Thrones can do both. This is something we haven't talked about with Star Wars. Star Wars can be a lot of things. I think Thrones can do that too, and I'm really happy that we have a Night of the Seven Kingdoms here. Also, it seems like due to its smaller scale, production-wise, this is a show that is going to come back around a lot more frequently. They're already filming season 2 right now, so we have to imagine we'll probably get season 2 next year at some point. Maybe not January again, but probably sometime in 2027 we will get the show again, and that's pretty cool. Now, thinking about where this show goes, and spoilers, for Game of Thrones lore and the books and whatnot, feel free to drop off now, but stick around if you're okay with spoilers about Dunk and Egg. Only two more novellas, right? Much like the proper A Song of Ice and Fire books, George R. R. Martin did not finish other Dunk and Egg novellas he had planned. So it's 2 more novellas. So that's clearly seasons 2 and 3. Very exciting. We're going to go to Dorne. Frankly, this will be the most time we spend in Dorne with season 2 compared to the very brief moments we spent there on Game of Thrones proper. So that's cool. But what about afterwards, right? Could they potentially make a season 4, season 5 about one of those other novellas George has planned? I know Thrones has largely gotten into trouble where they go off the page, right? Obviously, they ran out of books to adapt and they had to wrap up the main series somehow. We know we're not going to relitigate that. House of the Dragon, a show that I'm very high on, but other people are more mixed on. Fire and Blood, not exactly the most detailed storytelling, right? More of a textbook, more of a history book. There's gaps to fill in terms of how you plot things. Night of Seven Kingdoms, though, maybe because it's such a smaller focus type thing, you could create additional seasons and stories without having the source material readily available. Maybe that's easier to pull off. That'd be my assumption. Now, doing the other novellas is one thing, but I also think about the appeal of going to the future. We know about Dunk and Egg's ultimate fate at Summerhall, which I won't say here, but that is known. The details of that is not known. I'm not saying you necessarily have to adapt what happens at Summerhall, but maybe we at least spend time with Egg as the king when he becomes Aegon the Unlikely, right? I'd be curious about that. Maybe we'll see Maekar, his reign at some point as a way to have returning characters come back in the fold. Do we see Aerion? Do we see him drink the wildfire at some point? Maybe it's a bit contrived because in terms of bringing the plot back together, but that's a possibility. But I'm most curious about like seeing Aegon as the king and dealing with the subsequent Blackfire rebellions, but also when, Dunk becomes a knight of the King's Guard and ultimately the Lord Commander under Egg. And then Dunk has to fight Lionel in a trial by combat over marriage disputes. That'd be a cool way to bring Lionel back into the fore, right? But would they do that? Would they take this show that far where you almost assuredly have to recast Aegon? Because, I mean, Dexter Ansel, he is what, 12? 10 years old? He's 11. So he shot this when he was 10. I mean, even in 5-6 years from now, he's still going to be barely 18. Will he be able to plausibly play a king in his 30s? I don't know. Probably not, right? He's pretty precocious these days. Do they have much appetite for recasting Egg, but assumingly keeping Claffy as Dunk? Probably not, right? We're getting pretty far ahead of ourselves here. My point is, I think this show is scratching a different itch for the Thrones fan, the Thrones viewer, that it'd be a shame if it ultimately has to end after 3 seasons, right? Because after House of the Dragon, if they want to make another epic, obviously Aegon's Conquest is sitting right there to eventually do. You're not going to do 2 big expensive shows at once. So that's ways down the line. You got the tourney at Harrenhal on stage, which is really cool. I don't know if they're ever going to do Robert's Rebellion just because it's so close to Game of Thrones and you're going to be recasting Robert and Ned and Jaime to make that show. So I don't really know if they ever fully go down that path. It's definitely very safe, but there's so much to do in Thrones. And I know this also leads into the fact that, relying on prequels and spin-offs and existing source material versus telling new stories, I just don't think there's really much appetite at all to go beyond what happened with Game of Thrones, especially with the books completely unfinished. I don't think George ever really wants to do that. Not that he has complete say in the matter in terms of making this with Warner Brothers, but HBO. But I would hope that they can find a way to keep United Seven Kingdoms going, just because this show is such a great success, but also the structure and then the decision making that you saw displayed with this show, I think really lends a lot of confidence to continuing the show and it continuing in what it's been succeeding with. So really enjoyed it. I think it was ultimately still a blast, even though you're not watching like grand plot take place. And I think that really speaks to just the strength of these screenplays and the really thought put into how to tell this story on screen. So big fan of Night Seven Kingdom Season 1. Looking forward to Season 2, probably sometime next year. And let me know, what do you think about the future of the show? Do you want to see it go beyond the 3 novellas? And do you want to see them try and take Aegon to being a king? Maybe we'll see Maester Aemon pop back up in his younger years, etc., etc. Young Barris and Selmy could factor in here. There's threads to pull on. Let me know where you're at with all that. And for more TV reviews, more Thrones, House of the Dragon later this year, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Scare Out, new Chinese spy thriller film from Zhang Yimou. Zhang Yimou, 75, Chinese film legend. This is his 7th film since 2020, which is crazy to think about. I've actually reviewed a handful of these. I really enjoyed 2023's Full River Red, which starred Jackson Yi. Yi is back in Scare Out in a co-lead role. And this is Yimou's return to the spy thriller genre since Cliffwalkers came out back in 2021. This is, like Pegasus 3, one of the latest Chinese Lunar New Year films. Came in 2nd place in the Chinese box office behind Pegasus 3 this past week. And very excitingly, it has been made available in a limited capacity within days of premiering in China, which again just speaks to our changing times. Like, this was not the case at all, even just a few years ago. Very exciting. And Yimou has definitely become more of an establishment figure over in the Chinese film world and less of a global cinema face as the years have gone on. I still look forward to seeing whatever he is putting out. And Jackson Yi remains someone who I enjoy in almost everything I see him in, whether it was Better Days, Full River Red, Begon's Resurrection just a few months ago. Zhang Yimou's spy thriller film Scare Out is a tricky one. A film that is so inherently pro the world of mass surveillance and the surveillance state is a tougher ask these days. Moral misgivings aside though, the film is really choppy in terms of its editing, and the plot deviates between unnecessarily confounding and incredibly straightforward. There are some really cool drone shots of Shenzhen kind of highlighting the technology at the helm of the spy agency we're embedded in, and we experience a lot of classic spy tropes, double agents, questionable allegiances, very reminiscent of films like Enemy of the State. There's a lot of good spy components in this movie, but it doesn't really come together. I think about this movie a lot the way I think of Yimou's Under the Light from a few years ago, where there's elements to appreciate, but just the general concept and execution of the film doesn't completely work. One of the strongest moments of the movie is in the very beginning, where we jump right in res into a operation by this espionage unit as they're trying to, identify and stop a Chinese national working with foreign intelligence agency, nebulously Western, not explicitly said as a specific nation. You could assume it's the CIA and the Americans. They don't really say that. The pace in that initial scene is pretty cool. The problem is we kind of rehash at the very end of the movie, and it doesn't really land nearly as effectively. And the film is really centered around its two leads, Zhu Yilong and Jackson Yi, who play these two senior members of this espionage group, and they're both being suspected of, being a mole, turning over evidence, committing espionage against their own nation, right? And I think this film very clearly has a POV approved by the Chinese government. This is very much a film about the Chinese espionage law and the kind of draconian penalties of that. The film speaks openly about that kind of thing. I don't know if it's a movie that like blatantly comes across as like this is bad propaganda. To me, it's not egregious because it's just so obvious. It's like this is a film about spies and about why it's bad to betray your nation. These are inherently familiar themes to any viewer, let alone a Chinese person. So it's like, yes, it's obviously a movie with a message approved by the Chinese government. This film was made in association with the Chinese intelligence agency, whatever its official name is. That's all fine. Yimou's made other movies of a similar ilk recently, like Cliffwalkers. But to me, it's just like, this is not nearly as compelling as Enemy of the State. There's a lot of familiar elements, I think, of the infidelity aspect of this story, for example. But Enemy of the State has a Gene Hackman character. There is no aspect of the Gene Hackman character in Scare Out. I think the most intriguing character in the whole film has to be Yang Mi's Bei Fan, who is a Chinese national who went abroad and is active as a spy for a foreign agency, right? Betraying her nation, whatever. Her character is pretty interesting, and we actually get a lot of scenes with her. And I think which was kind of interesting about the story here is they tell you the identity of the mole and a lot of the mystery of the story right away. And we know who the bad guy is, so to speak, early on. So there's not a whole lot of inherent mystery. There's not much of a twist to the beginning. And there's some fun spy stuff going on in terms of disguises and costumes and hair pieces and things like that. There's a like first day, second day, third day structure with these title cards that doesn't really add much at all, frankly, just kind of confusing about why they thought it was important. There's also a lack of real detail about what exactly is being turned over to the foreign agency. Like, what is this, component that the scientist is stealing, things like that. It's all pretty vague, which is not this dissimilar from how Top Gun Maverick was incredibly vague about who its villain was. This is becoming more and more common these days, where they almost take an inoffensive route and be kind of vague. But like the MacGuffin in this movie, we don't really know what the MacGuffin is. We just know it's a bland MacGuffin. Kind of odd, I guess. There is a late breaking twist at the very end of the movie that when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this was not set up at all. Where did this come from? Then you get a little bit more of that. In terms of another familiar character coming in. There's a scene on a park bench. I won't spoil it, but when you get the scene on the park bench, I'm like, oh, I get it now. And it's a bit neat. It's a bit tidy. It was fine. Yeah, I think for me, though, it's like the editing. I think people are going to go either way on this. Like, either this movie is really too choppy or this is like Tony Scott homage. And bad Tony Scott homage is just really messy camera work, basically, right? It's hard to emulate that. And Yimou's talented enough and experienced enough that I would have expected a little bit better, honestly. But also I would have forgiven it more if I think the story was just a little bit more interesting than it ended up being. I'm very curious how people feel about this. I'm very curious how Chinese viewers feel about this, given the movie's very clear point of view and what it's thinking about. Infernal Affairs with Tony Leung, this movie is not. Let me know, though, what you think of Zhang Yimou's Scare Out. Did you like it more than me? What did you think about it? And for more movie reviews, including reviews of the recent Chinese releases like Pegasus 3 and Blades of the Guardians, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with the review of Pegasus 3, the new sports comedy film from director Han Han. This, of course, is the follow-up to the first two very successful Pegasus films, the first of which came out in 2019. Pegasus 2 released in 2024 and was a really mammoth success that year at the Chinese box office. Of course, Pegasus 3 is coming to us amidst the Chinese Lunar New Year, which of course is the most successful and biggest film going period of the year every year in China. It is pretty cool now that it is increasingly common that Chinese releases and even Lunar New Year releases are getting released day and date here in the States. I mean, even last year with, of course, Ne Zha 2 taking the world by storm, becoming the highest grossing animated movie of all time. That film did not release immediately here in the States just last year. But this year, we're getting Pegasus 3, Zhang Yimou's Scare Out, Blades of the Guardian, all these movies releasing within days of their premieres in China. And that's just really shows how far we've come. I like to check in on the Chinese films that do make their way to us over here. I really appreciated Dead to Rights last year, for example. I also thought Begon's Resurrection was pretty intriguing and unique, to say the least. And of course, check out my reviews on these movies as well as all the other big films over the years here out of China. Pegasus 3, this is actually my first time with the Pegasus films. I regret not seeing them. However, as a big fan of racing and racing films, I assumed that Pegasus 3 would still work for me even without any previous knowledge of its lead character and his past exploits, and that ended up being true. Pegasus 3 is a really entertaining and enjoyable sports comedy film. Shen Teng returns to play racing virtuoso Zhang Shi, this time competing as a privateer in a rally race over in China. Is this film's plot and pacing largely very predictable? Yes. Is it still a really rollicking good time? Also, yes. Almost half the film is active racing scenes, and unlike the previous Pegasus movies, which were more time trial type racing, Pegasus 3 is a true race to the finish line, and that just makes for exhilarating set pieces. Is the production design and the wow factor as high level as Joseph Kosinski's F1 from last year? Certainly not. But I think the racing scenes in this film are more than competent. Like many racing movies, whenever there's something unorthodox happening from a strategy perspective, the plausibility might come into question, but you're willing to let that go because you're just having such a fun time with this story, which also takes itself into a rags to riches type plotting, much like the past Pegasus films. Zhang Shi competing as a scrappy privateer against actual funded racing teams. I think the film is also just cool to watch on its own, even if you have a cursory interest. It's just because it's a rally racing film, so it's much different than F1. It's much different than Days of Thunder, Ford vs. Ferrari, all the Grand Prix, all the classic, racing films of old. We don't really have like a signature rally movie, and I don't know if the Pegasus franchise is going to take that place necessarily, but I did think it was a pretty cool and strong enough, portrayal of rally racing. I think the alt strategy that they employ at the end, in terms of taking tires that are meant for the road and taking them off road on the alternate route, again, might strain some belief here, but it was cool to see an alt strategy like that. I think one thing that might be a bit questionable in terms of the screenplay here is that the film immediately reveals to the viewer the early deception that's going on when all the car turbos are failing in the test and why that's happening and the reasoning behind all that. These are beats that are very familiar to people that know anything about racing in terms of the unfortunate relationship and necessity of funding that takes place in the expensive world of racing and how sponsors and alternative interests can often get in the way of the meritocracy of having the best people behind the wheel. Nothing that new if you understand racing or watch many racing movies. Thankfully, they didn't take too long before they revealed all of that to the rest of the characters, but I thought it was a bit interesting to just straight up tell us how that's happened really quickly. Perhaps a little bit more could have been done about the concept of like the national racing team in this movie, because before we know, you don't really get to know any of the other people that are competing to make the Chinese national rally team here. And the second half of the movie basically dispenses with that, as the people that are on that team, the finalists, are directly competing against Zhang Shi because he has to make his own entry. I think the concept and like the national pride aspect of all that not really played upon too much. There are some scenes in the main race where you see like the pit crew of the Indian team like being really invested in like this key moment before they completely disappear from the movie. The Japanese team, the Korean team, they don't really have much of an identity in the film. It's really all about the Chinese characters for the most part. Maybe I'm just an easy mark, but even a formulaic racing movie is still really entertaining to me. And I think anyone who's watched the previous Pegasus films, they obviously have a relationship with Zhang Shi and some of the other returning characters in this film. And even if maybe some of these beats are a little bit familiar to especially Pegasus 2, where, the rags to riches, up against all odds type thing, you're kind of rehashing some of that again. It's still fun to be with, to be honest. And this film is, in fact, leading the way at the Chinese Lunar New Year this year with a strong opening start of over 360 million, projected to gross at least 600 million in China. Interestingly, the Chinese Lunar New Year box office period is actually down almost 40% from last year, which of course was fueled by Ne Zha 2. And in general, just kind of analyzing and following the Chinese box office, it's been kind of interesting to see how that happens, where the Lunar New Year period is so indicative and so essential to the rest of the performance, where the Chinese box office has been struggling locally, right? I mean, the struggles we have here in the States and Canada and Europe, those are not struggles that China is immune to. China is also having a lot of problems with overall box office. And the Lunar New Year is like this massive spike where they might actually catch up and, in the case of last year, actually pull ahead in terms of total box office. But if you can take out this period from the rest of the year, you're seeing declines. It's an interesting trend worth paying attention to. But I'm just happy that these movies are coming to the States, in a limited release capacity, of course, but coming to the States in such a quick amount of time. I mean, I've been accustomed to just a few years ago waiting a month, 6 weeks to get a release if we ever got it, so this is certainly a big change. And Pegasus 3, I actually was able to see this movie in IMAX, and it was only in IMAX a few days, but the fact that I was able to get any IMAX screens so soon after it came out, like, again, this is just uncharted territory. It's very cool, because remember last year, Ne Zha 2 re-released a second time in an English dub, again, just speaking to how things have changed a little bit. But let me know, what did you think of this movie? If you've seen the previous Pegasus films, how would you compare it? If you're new to this franchise like me, were you pleasantly surprised? Somewhere in between, let me know. And for more movie reviews, including more Chinese movie reviews, I'm also going to do a review on Scare Out from Zhang Yimou and Blades of the Guardians next week. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Kokuho, the historical drama film from Lee Sang-il. Kokuho is quite significant because this is in fact the highest grossing live-action Japanese film in the history of Japan. And this film has had a really interesting success story to this point, premiering back at Cannes last year and then releasing in its native Japan last June. It's had an 8-month release in Japan and has just now really got any kind of expanded release here in the States. I know it was technically playing in LA, New York more recently, but it just bumped up to only 261 theaters last weekend. So people are still slowly getting a chance to see it, and it got a lot of attention in terms of the awards race, making the Best International Feature Film shortlist, but ultimately not getting that final Oscar nomination. But in a bit of a surprise, it still got a nomination for Best Makeup and Hairstyling at the Oscars, despite not actually getting into the International Feature Film. So it's definitely one of the most significant international films from last year, which really has turned out to be a tremendous year for world cinema if you reflect on 2025. But I've been anticipating being able to see this movie for a long time, and I'm happy that it's finally available. I really enjoyed Kokuho. I think this film is a tremendous journey into the world of kabuki theater in 20th century Japan, and the film really works on a number of thematic levels. Of course, the filmmaking here is tremendous. The production design, the costumes, as we see several elaborate kabuki theater set pieces. Absolutely gorgeous stuff. But the storytelling in the movie also is quite impressive as we follow this young orphan who gets adopted by a renowned kabuki actor in the 1960s. And I think the film has a lot to say about artists who want to be the absolute best and what that takes and how that affects the rest of your life, other people within your life. In the end, I think the movie is very rich. Now, if I had any notes, it's almost 3 hours in length. It had nearly 5 endings, it felt like. You probably could have toned this down and edited this movie just a little bit to be a bit more focused, but man, I thought it was a really satisfying and rewarding watch all the same. Right off the bat, you get something that's almost like a bit of a subversion in terms of where the movie goes, because we start off, with our young protagonist, Kokuho, who is the son of a Yakuza boss. And he basically ends up watching his father get assassinated by a rival gang, and he ends up becoming an orphan in the process, and he ends up being adopted by a very renowned and well-known Osaka kabuki actor, and he thus moves to Osaka to pick up his life. And you think, oh, maybe this movie will be about Kokuho eventually getting his revenge, and the movie kind of fakes you out because you think it's going to be about Kokuho getting his revenge on, those who killed his father and changed his life forever. But no, frankly, that's completely dispensed with at this point in the movie. And his Yakuza roots, notably has a very elaborate owl tattoo on his back, which is a, significant visual in, Japan society, of course. That comes back around, but it's not about, the mob stuff at all in the end. Structurally, I think the way the movie really sets us up, once we get to Osaka, Kikuo is immediately paired up with the son, the heir to the actor who has adopted him. And I should note that this famous kabuki actor who has adopted Kikuo is played by none other than the legend Ken Watanabe. And Ken Watanabe, takes Kikuo under his wing, and he pairs up Kikuo with his own son, Shunsuke, as they both train for the world of kabuki, and specifically onagata, of course, the traditional portrayal of female characters, female roles by male actors. It sets up a bit of like a sports movie trope where they're, competing against each other, and then they ultimately end up starting to work together and perform together. And the movie really starts to blossom over the course of its first half or so because Kikuo's better. He's so dedicated and committed to being the best. And Hanjiro, Ken Watanabe's character, recognizes this and eventually decides to pass down the legacy of this honor of this kabuki family, basically, to Kikuo, even though he's an outsider. He doesn't actually carry the name. And the movie at this point really gravitates towards what it means to have a name in Japan, and talks a lot about the specificity of family dynamics and family legacy over the course of traditional Japanese history and things like that. And I actually think it gets like pretty well into it, because as you're watching the movie, and there's a lot of ups and there's a lot of downs as things start to turn, and controversy finds itself to Kikuo after they originally had so much fame and seemingly a little bit of fortune, as well as they were really widely regarded for their work. And the issue of legacy and what's right and wrong in terms of inheriting honor and things like that, I think it really kind of subsumes the movie in a quite compelling way. In plot-wise, of course, we see, the rise, the fall, the return to grace, the return to acceptance, the shame, everything in between. All that I think is pretty good for a plot perspective. No surprise that the movie has a Best Makeup and Hairstyling nomination at the Oscars. Of course, tons of elaborate costumes, and that includes, of course, all the all-white face paint and the headpieces and everything that goes into being a kabuki performer. It's done with such painstaking detail. You see several elaborate sequences that are quite long as you're basically watching your performance with the audience for parts of this movie. And I think as you're watching the movie and we're approaching hour 3, I think the last performance maybe got a little long in the tooth for me necessarily, but like it's hard to not be impressed with just the scenes that you're watching with all of this. And I think if maybe we had trimmed just a few moments around other aspects of the story, it just would have worked a little bit tighter for me. I think the most notable thing that's been cited as a kind of gap in the screenplay, I guess, is Kikuo ends up having a illegitimate child with a geisha that he meets at one point, and he doesn't really acknowledge that he's this girl's dad, things like that. That's kind of just in the story at times. It doesn't really come around too much. It's kind of just a plot device. Don't know if we necessarily needed all of that stuff, but I really liked how the movie progressed between Kikuo and Shunsuke's relationship as they obviously come together, then go really divert apart when Hanjiro basically picks Kikuo instead of his own son to pass down the legacy of their name and whatnot. And then watching one rise, the other fall, seeing that flip, and then seeing them come together at the end as they've aged and time have passed, and they come back together and reunite and perform once again. I think that all was pretty nice as that relationship is expounded upon, again, quite slowly as we watch the movie. The movie makes a point of showing you these placards, and go from 1960s to 70s to 80s. That's where most of the story takes place. But we eventually get to the near present day, eventually, as Kokuho gets older. And the title of the film, Kokuho, is, of course, the Japanese term for national living treasure, someone who has been esteemed to be a great ambassador, creator of the arts, as best as I understand it, to Japanese society. Does Kokuho actually get that title? Because clearly he's been striving to achieve that. He wants to be the best kabuki actor in all of Japan. He says so as much in the beginning of the movie. Now, there has been a interesting amount of commentary, frankly, about what this movie isn't doing. I think a lot of people were expecting this to be some kind of queer examination, of course, the world of kabuki and specifically onagata, where women were forbidden from performing, and thus all the female roles were performed by men, and that inherent misogyny that carried over into larger Japanese societal dynamics, especially at that time, were in fact inspecting this kind of uber masculinity that's involved around the actual portrayal of femininity on stage and things like that. There's been a lot of commentary about people about whether they're actually happy with what this movie says, or the fact that it doesn't actually say a lot about those themes overall. I really didn't care about that stuff too much. Yes, maybe if you were hoping this would be a queer story, it's not one at all, frankly. And it's also not one that's carrying a modern viewpoint necessarily on this world, right? We're watching the world of kabuki theater in the late 20th century. It's presenting it for what it is, and it's showing you the faults. It's showing you the thorns. The female characters throughout this movie are largely in service of Kokuho, and he doesn't show them a ton of grace and respect for the most part. Does the movie take that deep enough for some people? Apparently not, but I don't think it shies away from anything like that, frankly. I think if there's any notes to have about the movie, more importantly, it's just kind of structurally, just general length and editing. But in terms of just a lavish production that really gets in there into a story in this world and the challenges of finding purpose when you don't really have a legacy to claim, I think it's pretty cool, man. I really enjoyed the movie. Reflecting on Best International Feature Film at the Oscars, of course, the big trio that got nominated, Sentimental Value, It Was Just an Accident, and The Secret Agent, all movies I liked quite a bit and reviewed. I was really disappointed that, South Korea's No Other Choice from Park Chan-wook was not nominated. I've still yet to see Surat, which has not been released in the States, and the voice of Hin Rajab from Tunisia doesn't even have U.S. distribution still. Again, haven't seen those movies, but I think Kokuho should have been there, and obviously I really think No Other Choice should have been there, having seen these. Nevertheless, what'd you think of this movie? Obviously, if you're a Japanese person, you saw this movie almost a year ago at this point, but for Western audiences, we're just now really getting a chance to see it, and I think it's worth the time. Let me know what you think of the movie, and for more film reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do for the pod this week. Next week, we are absolutely stacked with things to discuss. Blackpink in your area, once again, new album deadline. Bruno Mars, new album. I'm going to see Rich Brian in concert. Gotta talk about that. TV, we have the return of Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2 on Apple. The conclusion of Industry Season 4 on HBO. I'm going to catch up on A24's How to Make a Killing with Glenn Powell. Oh, and F1 Drive to Survive on Netflix is back with another season. A lot to get into next week. So make sure you subscribe. youtube.com/nostalgiapod. linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Leave a comment. Let me know it's good. And I'll see you next week.